Thank you for coming to the panel, Plastic-Free Futures, Education as a Path to Climate Justice. My name is Ritchie, and I am so excited to be moderating this conversation with these two amazing panelists to just chat a little bit about community organizing and climate justice advocacy. And just without further ado, we'll go into some introductions about ourselves. So starting with me, my name is Ritchie. I am 20 years old, and I'm from Freeport, Grand Bahama, and I'm a student at Columbia University studying sustainable development. I focus a lot in my work on the importance of intersectionality and accessibility, and with my platforms, the EcoJustice Project, as well as my podcast, Black Girl Blueprint, and just my work in the classroom as well on Columbia's campus, just trying to amplify marginalized voices and storytelling. So it's a bit about me, and I'll pass it over to Yvette to introduce themselves.
Good morning. My name is Yvette Arellano, they, them. I'm the founder and executive director of Fenceline Watch, an advocacy group whose focus is to end toxic multi-generational harm here in the home of the largest petrochemical complex, Houston, Texas. Thank you so much for having me, and I'll pass it on to Sharon.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sharon Lavigne, and I'm from St. James, Louisiana, and I'm the director and founder of a faith-based organization in St. James Parish. This organization came about because this industry called for most of plastics would like to be built 2 miles from my home in St. James, Louisiana. And I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Thank you both for those introductions. I am so excited to get into this conversation. Just to jump right in, I think it's so important to acknowledge that there's just a tendency for a lot of environmental advocacy or activism to focus on the natural environment. And then I think with that, there's a tendency to not appropriately address, the human impacts or social implications tied to, systemic injustice when it comes to addressing climate issues. And I would love to just hear from both of you what the term climate justice, especially since this is a relatively new buzzword, means to both of you and how it shows up in the work that you do.
Well, for me, climate justice, especially right now when we're focusing and talking so much about environmental justice, is very separate, because environmental justice addresses inequities that intersect everything from housing to income to gender justices, and it brings it together with how does climate now impact all of these other issues I'm facing over whether or not I'm able to make my rent. Am I already sick? Am I having some health issues? And on top of that, having to deal with a global pandemic. So that's where climate justice comes in and fills in, this is our environment, here's the environmental degradation, and it's not only degrading our environment, but our human health, right? So it's the merriment of both climate justice and social issues. That's how I like to begin, is really getting at environmental justice.
In my view of climate injustice is, first of all of these issues with industry that's trying to come in, and it's always in a Black and brown poor community, and that's injustice to me, because when they are asked to go to a community of white citizens, they are not allowed there. And in St. James, our public officials always vote for it to come into the 5th district, where we have mostly Black and brown people. So that's an injustice, and it needs to be changed. And that's why we are working hard to get this scenario changed.
Thank you so much. And I think that's actually a great segue to talk about how we can get more people aware of these connections between the social impacts that you're both talking about and environmental issues. And especially even thinking about my work with the EcoJustice Project, something that was very important to me was making sure that climate information, especially because there's so much jargon and it can be so complex and overwhelming, to make sure that local people know what's happening and what's going on in their communities, and also that public officials know what's going on so they're able to help. And I would just love to hear from both of you just how education has been so, essential to the work that you're doing, and how raising awareness is important for climate action in this way.
Well, something we face a lot here is having these large conservation groups come in and do everything from conservation efforts in forestry to focus on specific endangered species, but you hardly ever hear about what that means for people on the ground. So in my community, it's largely a Spanish speaking community. My first language is Spanish. My parents migrated here in the late 60s, early 70s. So growing up translating really heavy documents that are overly technical is something we grew up doing. But understanding that civil rights was there to protect us against the discrimination against our nationality also spills over to the environmental realm. When we're talking about rules and regulations that are so technical that you can't just hand a sheet of paper to somebody and think that you did something good and that they're going to show up to a meeting to combat oil, gas, or petrochemical facility that's going to be built next to us. No, it's about understanding that there are language barriers, understanding that not everyone is a chemical engineer, and understanding that we need ample time to respond to those kinds of projects coming into our community and give us a fair shot to say, we don't want this here. We're already sick. We're already encumbered by so many other things. It's time for us to do something. And I hear that constantly. People need to stand up. But do other folks really understand what we're combating whenever a facility comes in 1 week in advance? Whenever we get to meetings and there's no translation and interpretation equipment, and you have a 6-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old translating for their parents, I think that's where we need to get to a better understanding. And that's where we need these larger conservation groups along with the federal government to really understand what are the social implications, what is culturally competent outreach to do in our communities to give us that voice at the table and not just say you had the opportunity and you missed it.
Yes, I totally agree with Yvette. That's true. Education is the key to what's going on in this country. We didn't know anything about the industry, anything about the environment, anything about the impacts of the chemical plants that's in our area until we started to learn. That's why we formed our organization to teach people also. Education is the key. How are we going to know what's going on if we don't know the issues or what the effects? We didn't know the effects of the chemical plant was poisoning us and making us sick, giving us cancer, and we're dying. All we knew was we were dying, sick and dying, and still sick and dying. And so bringing us the educational part to the community, a lot of people thank us for that. And a lot of people are learning and they're reading. Whenever we pass out pamphlets, they would read it and they would say they didn't know that was going on. They didn't know this caused this. And I think that's the number one answer to your question: education. Educate the public, educate ourselves first, then educate the public. And from there, you will see a lot of people are grateful that we brought the information to them. And just like if we're not educated on the House bills that these people are trying to pass, they'll pass them without us even knowing because we don't understand the bill. So we have to be educated on the issues in order for us to go forward. So that's the number one priority: education.
That's so true. Yes. And I'm so glad you brought up community as well, because that's also something, that I really wanted to talk about. And especially with the example that you were giving, about how a community can see a trend that's happening, that yes, we're dying and we don't know where it's coming from. Public officials don't have, that knowledge that the community has. And I think especially with a lot of the work that both of you are doing being centered around, community organizing and grassroots organizations, I would just love to hear from both of you, what role you see community organizing playing in climate actions, but also what can public leaders and officials learn from community groups, and how can they also better allocate resources to support, this form of advocacy work that's so important.
So the role of community is vital to our work as community organizers. We're not the Justice League, right? So we can't just solve climate justice and all the extreme weather we're facing alone. And there's no magic wand that's going to come about. And what we need is people in numbers driving this effort, but all of the barriers that we're talking about, the overly technical information, the not understanding what our communities actually look like, are all existing barriers that are keeping people from not only speaking against this infrastructure, but let's take voting. You know, we see those structures in place, and this is where we get to the heart of systemic racism. Those are barriers that are being created, that have existed in institutions to keep us from participating publicly. So, at least I see our role being as one that I hope will one day be obsolete. I don't want my grandkids, my great grandkids doing this work thinking that they're going to do this for their whole lives. I want to be able to say there is an end date to all this, and we will come to those solutions, because we can't keep pushing against something without our public officials being held accountable for their actions, where that is taking industry monies to fuel those campaigns, to make those decisions, and not actual people. I would want them to come out to our communities and actually listen and take charge of the fact that they're in positions of power that they were so welcome into, I'll put it that way, right? And that so many of us aren't in those positions to make those decisions. We should hold them accountable to do that outreach. It is not on the individual responsibility, right, for each one of us to take that technical language apart. Let's create those policies, rules, and regulations that say that it should be in reach to the general public. Let's say, hey, having everyone understand, having everyone access this is important to us as public officials, right? And let's hold our agencies accountable. Yes, we have the Clean Air Act, but where is the enforcement? And that's what we constantly struggle with EPA on. They don't have enforcement, there is no teeth, and we need those teeth in place to protect the people. Because if we don't, then it is just a symbolic body of people who have really great intentions and no intention to see it through and see that change actually happen. Because in states like Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, all these major red states, our state government doesn't have our backs. Let's lay it all out there. Doesn't have our backs, and we're looking to the federal government to really say, look, we accepted this as our duty. We're going to come down, we're going to hold ourselves accountable, and we're going to serve the people.
Yes, I also agree with Yvette on that also. For example, we had a meeting with our parish council, and he's not on board with us. He welcomed industry, and we are trying to hold them accountable. Our senators, our representatives, they are not being held accountable. They don't even consider the citizens in the parish. We thinking that they gear toward industry, because they say industry, we need industry because people need to pay their bills and we need jobs. Our fight is we do need it to a certain extent. If it's going to poison us, we don't need it, and we want to shut it down. I live 2-3 miles from an industry. Every day it's polluting us. The EPA came down to speak with the citizens, not with the politicians. We had a better turnout when he came to speak to us. Whenever they speak to the politicians, they candy coat it, make it look like it's so nice, and the citizens is all for it. But no, we had our voice to speak in November to the EPA, to Michael Regan, and he listened to us. He understand our concerns. He didn't even speak to the politicians, and that was a plus. So we are trying to get air monitors into our community to prove to the world that we are being polluted, because they are saying we are not being polluted. Our parish presidents say this is not Cancer Alley. We made a video about him saying it. Whenever you all want to see the video, whenever the video is out, you're welcome to see it. We show one of our parish council members running away from us. He didn't want to speak with us. We formed Rise St. James to protect the community, to protect our lives. And we are doing the works of the politicians. We shouldn't have to do that because we voted them in office. They don't even call a meeting in the community to explain what's going on. We have to do that. That's a lot on our plate that we are doing. We are doing their jobs. Not one of them call a meeting in our community to explain anything,
Exactly.
laws or anything. So this needs to be turned around. They need to be held accountable, not us.
Yes, absolutely.
And
Yes.
to get rid of the doublespeak, right?
Absolutely.
We have a new administrator who is in Regan, and we have a secretary of energy that's going around saying we're going to welcome in the just transition. A week ago, Sarah Week, an industry conference came in, and you had the U.S. Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, say we need to collapse bureaucracy. Expediting permitting is on our agenda. And then we have an administrator coming in saying we're working with DOE, we're working with department, we're working with all these across agencies, and we're going to make your work a lot easier. Industry, oil, gas, petrochemicals. We don't need that doublespeak. We need people to actually show up for our communities. And I feel that with Russia and Ukraine going on, there is this immense pressure on people to say, yes, we need more oil, we need more gas, without taking into account what does that mean for our communities, our environment, and our public health, again, during a global pandemic.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I think that is such a powerful note to end on. Thank you. Yes, thank you both for this and for this conversation and for sharing your insight. I'd love to just leave the final 2 minutes or so that we have, if you have any final thoughts, any final words for the audience to wrap up the conversation.
Ms. Sharon.
So I think that this was wonderful, and I think it needs to be known throughout the world what's going on with this climate change and with all of these issues that we are having with our lives, and it needs to be known. And I thank you all for inviting us to this conference.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I'd say that people need to know that we have schools down the street that are sitting across petrochemical plants, refineries, that when those kids are let out at 2:45, they're walking into emissions, that unborn children are affected by these toxic emissions while they're sitting in their mom's wombs, that people like myself and so many women in our community are facing sterility issues and unable to even think about the future in that kind of way. And there are no resources. We don't have the healthcare to support it. So please understand that this isn't something that's happening in what people consider as developing or third world nations. This is going on in your backyard here in the US, specifically in the Gulf Coast, and we need it to stop. And we're reaching out to you on this panel and through so many mediums to try and reach you, the general public. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. And thank you. Great.
Thank you.